The crackle of the mesquite fire was a hollow echo in the vast, unforgiving plains. Samuel Drake, a man whose 41 years had etched themselves onto his face like a cartographer's careful lines, stared into the dancing flames. He felt like a tumbleweed, unbound and unmoored, rolling wherever the capricious wind decided. His saddle, worn smooth from countless journeys, served as his only pillow. In the boundless sky, his roof. He'd seen too many sunsets paint the horizon in hues of regret, and too many dawns promise a future that never materialized. Landless, penniless, and with a future as barren as the landscape around him, Samuel often wondered if he was merely taking up space, a ghost of a man haunting the fringes of civilization. He was good with his hands, could ride a horse like he'd been born in the saddle, and his aim with a rifle was true. But these were skills for survival, not for building a life. The gnawing insecurity, a constant companion, whispered that he wasn't enough, never would be. The next morning, the dust of a small, nondescript settlement shimmered in the distance. He rode in on his bay mare, a creature as weary as himself, the clatter of her hooves on the hard earth the only sound disturbing the quiet afternoon. A few sleepy-eyed townsfolk glanced his way, then quickly looked away, their indifference a familiar sting. Samuel secured his horse outside the town's only saloon, its warped sign proclaiming "The Thirsty Cactus." As he pushed through the swinging doors, the smell of stale beer and unfulfilled dreams washed over him. He ordered a sarsaparilla, his usual, and settled onto a stool, observing. That's when she arrived. A wagon, larger and sturdier than any he'd seen in these parts, rumbled into the dusty main street. Atop the driver's seat sat a woman, her posture straight, her gaze fixed ahead. She wore a practical, dusty traveling dress, but there was an unmistakable elegance in her bearing. Her hair, the color of rich earth, was pulled back neatly, revealing a face that was both determined and striking. Even from a distance, Samuel could feel the quiet hum of purpose radiating from her. This wasn't some weary traveler passing through. This was a woman on a mission. "Charlotte Hayes," he heard someone whisper, followed by a hushed, "She's opening the old general store." The general store. It had been boarded up for years, a monument to failed aspirations. Samuel watched, captivated, as she dismounted with a fluid grace that belied the arduous journey she must have undertaken. She moved with an efficiency that was almost alarming in its precision. She began unhitching her team, her movements unhurried yet resolute. He saw her exchange a brief, polite word with a curious passerby, a soft smile gracing her lips, then return to her task with renewed focus. Over the next few days, Samuel found himself drawn to the general store, not as a customer, for he had little to buy, but as an observer. He'd sit on the porch of the saloon, nursing his sarsaparilla, watching Charlotte. She was relentless. She swept out years of dust and cobwebs, scrubbed grime from the windows until they gleamed, and began to arrange goods on the sparse shelves. He saw her lift heavy crates, her brow furrowed in concentration, but never a hint of complaint. Her hands, though capable, weren't calloused like his. They were the hands of a woman who knew how to manage, to create, to nurture. He noticed the way she interacted with the few customers who ventured in, her voice clear and kind, her patience endless. She remembered names, inquired about families, and offered practical advice with a genuine warmth that was rare in this hardened land. He watched her unpack bolts of calico, bags of flour, and tins of coffee, each item handled with a reverence that suggested she understood their true value to a struggling community. There was a quiet strength in her, an unwavering belief in what she was doing, even when the odds seemed stacked against her. One afternoon, as she struggled to hoist a particularly heavy barrel of molasses onto a display, her breath coming in short gasps, Samuel found himself rising from his customary spot. He hadn't intended to move, but his feet carried him forward, his hands itching to help. He stopped just outside the store, a peculiar mix of apprehension and a nascent desire to be useful stirring within him. He watched her push, strain, her face flushed with effort. She didn't see him, too engrossed in her struggle. The barrel teetered precariously. Samuel took a step forward, then another. The wind, which had been so indifferent to his existence, seemed to carry a faint whisper of purpose, a new direction for the dusty wanderer. A leaky roof and a helping hand. The late afternoon sun, usually a welcome sight, only highlighted the streaky dampness creeping across the ceiling of the old general store. Charlotte, her brow furrowed, wrestled with a heavy barrel of molasses, its sticky weight resisting her every effort. A steady drip, drip, drip from a particularly dark stain above the display counter punctuated her grunts of exertion, mocking her attempts at order. The roof was more sieve than shelter, and with the autumn rains threatening, she knew the problem couldn't wait. She paused, wiping a bead of sweat from her temple with the back of her hand, her gaze drifting towards the open doorway. Samuel sat on the worn bench across the street, as he often did, a silent sentinel. His lean frame was relaxed, almost indolent, but his eyes, she'd noticed, missed nothing. He was a fixture of the settlement's periphery, a man without a discernible purpose beyond existing. Yet there was something in his quiet observance that stirred a thought, a wild, improbable notion. She took a deep breath, pushing aside her reservations. What did she have to lose? She crossed the dusty street, her strides purposeful. Samuel watched her approach, a flicker of surprise in his normally impassive eyes. He braced himself for a request for spare change, or perhaps a polite but firm instruction to move along. He hadn't expected her to stop directly in front of him, casting a long shadow over his worn boots. "Mr. Drake," Charlotte began, her voice clear and direct, "I need help with my roof." The bluntness of her request stole his breath. He blinked, the words echoing in the sudden silence. His roof? He had no roof, no property, nothing but the clothes on his back, and the dust of 1,000 roads beneath his feet. My roof, ma'am?" he finally managed, his voice rougher than he intended. "No, Mr. Drake, my roof," she clarified, a faint hint of exasperation in her tone. "The store's roof. It leaks like a colander, and I can't manage it alone. I've seen you around. You look like a man who knows his way around tools, or at least a ladder." She paused, her gaze steady, challenging. "Are you willing to earn an honest day's wage?" Samuel felt a strange jolt. An honest day's wage. The words felt foreign, almost alien. He hadn't been asked to do anything useful in so long, not truly. He was skilled, yes, but those skills were for survival, for evading, for staying hidden. Not for building, not for fixing. A nascent warmth, a flicker of something long dormant, stirred within him. I suppose I could, ma'am," he mumbled, pushing himself off the bench. He followed her back to the store, a peculiar lightness in his step. The ladder was old and creaky, but Samuel tested it with a practiced eye before ascending. He moved with an unexpected agility, his rough hands surprisingly deft as he examined the damaged shingles. The sun beat down, intensifying the tar smell and the heat radiating from the dark wood. He worked methodically, his earlier self-doubt fading with each loose shingle he pried up, each new piece of cedar he hammered into place. He felt the unfamiliar burn of purpose in his muscles, the satisfying weight of the hammer, the scrape of calloused fingers against the rough roof. It was honest work, hard work, and for the first time in years, he felt useful, necessary even. Below, Charlotte moved barrels and crates, humming a low tune as she rearranged the store. She glanced up occasionally, watching Samuel. His movements were fluid, economical, betraying a competence she hadn't initially anticipated. His back was broad, his shoulders powerful beneath the patched fabric of his shirt. He hadn't spoken much, only a few gruff questions about where she kept the nails or the tar. But his silence wasn't sullen, it was focused. She noticed the way he carefully avoided stepping on the brittle old shingles more than necessary, how he cleared away the debris, even the small bits, before beginning the repairs. There was a meticulousness to his labor that belied his rough appearance, a quiet dedication. He wasn't just slapping new wood on old, he was trying to truly fix it. A small smile touched her lips. Beneath the wanderer's exterior, beneath the self-imposed distance, she was beginning to see glimmers of something more. Kindness, perhaps, and certainly a deep, untapped reservoir of quiet strength. The rhythmic thud of his hammer was a welcome sound, a promise of shelter and stability, one she hadn't dared to hope for just hours ago. A glimmer of hope. The molasses barrel, a stubborn, squat behemoth, resisted Charlotte's efforts. Her brow furrowed with strain, a guttural grunt escaping as her muscles bunched against its inert mass. A fine sheen of perspiration slicked her forehead, a testament to her exertion despite the cool evening air. Samuel, who had been leaning against the porch post, a silent sentinel for nearly an hour, finally pushed off with a soft exhale. He moved with an economical grace that belied any weariness, his calloused hands finding a natural grip on the barrel's rim. With a practiced heave, the barrel surrendered, rumbling across the dusty floor of the old general store. Charlotte straightened, her chest rising and falling gently, and brushed a tendril of hair from her temple. "Thank you, Samuel," she said, her voice a little breathless. Her gaze, direct and unwavering, found his. "You possess an uncanny knack for appearing precisely when I need you most." He shrugged, a faint blush creeping up his weathered neck. "Just happened to be passing." A transparent fabrication, and they both knew it. He'd been watching her since dawn, an inexplicable draw pulling him to the dilapidated storefront where she toiled ceaselessly. She stepped closer, her subtle scent, a whisper of lavender and dust, reaching him. "Samuel," she began, her tone softening, "I've noticed how you look at me, and I've heard the whispers about you." His jaw tightened, a familiar bitterness coiling within him. "That I'm a drifter, a man with nothing but the clothes on his back and a worn-out saddle." He braced himself for pity, for the gentle dismissal he'd encountered countless times. But Charlotte shook her head, her eyes, the hue of warm honey, brimming with unexpected conviction. "No, Samuel. I see a man who understands survival. A man with capable hands and a quiet strength. A man who watches, who observes, who cares." She reached out, her fingers lightly brushing his arm. The feather-light contact sent a jolt through him, electrifying nerve endings that had long lain dormant. "I don't yearn for a man with land, Samuel, or money, or a name that echoes through generations. I desire you." The words hung in the air, potent and utterly disarming. Samuel's breath caught. His mind, usually a barren landscape of pragmatic survival, was suddenly inundated with a torrent of unfamiliar sensations. Hope, fragile and terrifying, bloomed in his chest, a delicate flower pushing through parched earth. He hadn't felt such a thing in years, not since, well, not truly ever, not like this. This wasn't the fleeting promise of a full belly or a warm fire. This was the promise of a future, a shared one. "Me?" he rasped, his voice rough with disbelief. "I possess nothing, Charlotte. No home, no prospects. Just these two hands and a history of bad decisions." Her grip on his arm tightened. "And those hands are capable, Samuel. And that history? We can forge a new one. Together." She glanced around the dusty, empty store, then back at him, a determined glint in her eyes. "This place is merely four walls and a multitude of dreams right now. But we can transform it into something more. We can build something, Samuel, from scratch." He stared at her, this beautiful, brave woman, offering him not just a chance, but a partnership, a profound purpose. The crushing weight of his perceived inadequacy, a constant companion, began to dissipate, replaced by a tremor of burgeoning possibility. He saw the flicker of doubt in her own gaze, the unspoken question of whether he would be enough, whether he would rise to the occasion. "It won't be easy," he finally managed, his voice still a little hoarse. "Nothing truly worthwhile ever is," she replied, her smile soft but resolute. "Are you afraid, Samuel?" He met her gaze, his own now unwavering. "Terrified," he admitted, a surprising honesty in his tone. "But I'm willing to try." A small, triumphant smile played on her lips. "Then so am I." She held out her hand, not for aid this time, but as an offering. He took it, his rough fingers enclosing hers. The unspoken pact hung in the air, a silent promise whispered between them, two solitary souls finding a shared horizon in the fading light of a new beginning. They had only dreams and each other, but for the first time in a long time, that felt like an abundance. Winter's fury. A sudden, violent gust rattled the window panes of the general store, a sound like a giant's angry breath. Charlotte, wrestling with a stubborn barrel of molasses near the back, paused, her brow furrowed. The air, already crisp, had taken on an ominous edge, a biting cold that seeped through the thick walls. Outside, the clear, frosty sky of morning had vanished, swallowed by a bruised purple. Snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in a thick, driven torrent, each crystal a tiny, stinging missile against the glass. Samuel, who had been methodically stacking firewood near the pot-bellied stove, looked up, his gaze meeting Charlotte's. "That's no ordinary snow," he stated, his voice low, a note of warning in it. He walked to the front door, pushing aside the heavy canvas curtain. The wind shrieked, tearing at his coat, and a fine powder of snow instantly dusted his hair. Visibility was already dropping fast, the skeletal trees at the edge of town dissolving into a swirling white blur. "We need to secure this place, Charlotte, and fast." Her face, usually composed, showed a flicker of apprehension. "Secure it? How bad can it be?" As if in answer, a thunderous crack echoed from the roof as a branch, heavy with ice and snow, snapped. The store trembled. Samuel didn't hesitate. "Bad enough. We've got loose shutters, that back door isn't quite snug, and those windows, they won't hold against a real gale." He grabbed a hammer and a handful of nails from his tool belt. "Start bringing anything valuable away from the windows. I'll see to the outside." Charlotte moved with an efficiency that belied her earlier uncertainty. She began dragging sacks of flour, tins of coffee, and bolts of fabric away from the glass, her movements swift and determined. Samuel, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of action. He braced the front door with a thick plank of wood, nailing it securely. He scrambled onto a rickety ladder, battling the wind to fasten a loose shutter, his gloved hands surprisingly nimble despite the biting cold. The snow was now a blinding white sheet, swirling around him, coating his eyelashes in ice. He could barely see Charlotte's frantic movements inside, illuminated by the flickering lamplight. A sudden, sharp gust tore at the side of the building, and a pane of glass in the storage room clattered dangerously. "Samuel!" Charlotte's voice was a strained cry above the wind's howl. He was there in an instant, pushing past her into the small, unheated room. The window was bowing inwards, a spiderweb of cracks already forming. "Quick, help me with this table," he ordered, pointing to a sturdy oak piece. Together, their shoulders pressed against the wood. They shoved the heavy table against the window, bracing it with another plank he quickly found and nailed into place. Their breath plumed in the frigid air, their faces flushed from the effort. Hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. They moved a heavy grain bin to block the draft from the back door. They stuffed rags into every crack and crevice, their fingers growing numb despite their gloves. The storm outside raged like a wild beast, its roars punctuated by the groans and creaks of the old building, which seemed to be fighting for its very life. Each time a particularly violent gust hit, they instinctively looked at each other, a shared worry and a fierce resolve in their eyes. Finally, as darkness truly settled, the wind began to abate, its fury slowly receding into a mournful whine. The silence, when it came, was profound, broken only by the occasional drip of melting snow from the roof. They stood in the center of the store, surrounded by their hasty barricades, their faces smudged with dirt and exhaustion. Charlotte's hair had come loose from its pins, framing her face in wild tendrils. Samuel's usually stoic expression was softened by a weariness that went bone deep. He gestured around the makeshift fortress. "Well," he rasped, his voice hoarse, "it's still standing." Charlotte let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, a small, triumphant laugh escaping her lips. "It is," she agreed, her eyes sparkling in the dim lamplight. She looked at Samuel, truly looked at him, seeing not just the capable man who had saved her store, but the quiet strength and unwavering purpose he had shown. "Thank you, Samuel. I don't know what I would have done." He met her gaze, a faint blush rising on his weather-beaten cheeks. "We did it, Charlotte," he corrected gently, the implication clear. In the face of winter's fury, they had stood together, and for the first time in a long time, Samuel felt truly useful, truly needed. And he found he liked the feeling very much. Seeds of doubt, seeds of growth. The rhythmic thud of Charlotte wrestling with the molasses barrel echoed Samuel's internal struggle. He watched her, muscles straining, a determined frown creasing her brow. He wanted to help, to simply lift the heavy wooden drum himself, but a cold knot of apprehension tightened in his gut. What right did he, a man with nothing but the dust on his boots, have to offer assistance to a woman so clearly capable, so effortlessly more? The thought, stale and familiar, tasted like ash. He was a wanderer, a survivor, yes, but what kind of partner? He had no land, no coin, no discernible future beyond the next horizon. He was a ghost of a man, good for nothing but fading away. Charlotte finally managed to nudge the barrel into a slightly better position, exhaling with a grunt of effort. She looked up, caught his gaze, and offered a weary but genuine smile. "This blasted thing weighs a ton," she declared, wiping a stray strand of hair from her forehead. "Fancy a turn?" The invitation, simple as it was, felt like a gauntlet thrown. He hesitated, the old demons whispering their usual litany of inadequacy. "She deserves better. You'll only disappoint her. You always do." But then he saw the glint in her eyes, not of pity, but of shared struggle, and something shifted. He pushed off the porch railing, the planks groaning softly under his weight, and moved towards her. "Let me," he said, his voice a little rougher than he intended. He gripped the barrel, testing its weight, and with a surge of strength born of both necessity and a desperate yearning to prove himself, he hoisted it onto the small dolly she'd brought out. The sweat broke on his brow, but the feeling of solid wood against his palms, the satisfying thunk as it settled, was a small victory. Charlotte's smile deepened, a genuine warmth radiating from her. "Thank you, Samuel. You're a lifesaver." Her simple gratitude was a balm, but the doubts lingered. Later, as they ate a simple supper of stew and fresh bread, the conversation turned to the future. "I was thinking," Charlotte began, her gaze sweeping over the small, untended patch of earth behind the store. "We could put in a garden. Nothing fancy, just some fresh vegetables, maybe some herbs." Samuel picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. "A garden takes work, Charlotte, and time, and security." The last word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Security that I can't provide. She reached across the rough-hewn table, her hand covering his. Her touch was firm, reassuring. "We'll make the time, Samuel. And as for security, we'll build it, together, brick by brick, seed by seed." Her eyes, a startling shade of hazel, held his. "I don't need a man with land or an overflowing purse, Samuel. I need a man with a good heart and strong hands, and I believe you have both in abundance." His throat tightened. He wanted to believe her, to truly absorb her unwavering faith, but the scars of past failures ran deep. "You don't know," he started, his voice barely a whisper. "I know what I see, she interrupted softly. "I see a man who watches out for me, who helps without being asked, who is kind. Don't you dare doubt your worth, Samuel. Not with me." The sincerity in her voice was undeniable, a powerful counterpoint to the cacophony of his own self-criticism. He squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of her grace. The next morning, armed with a borrowed spade and a packet of seeds Charlotte had somehow acquired, they began. The earth was hard, resisting their efforts, but they persevered. Samuel, despite his lingering anxieties, found a rhythm in the repetitive motion of turning the soil, breaking up clods, preparing the ground. Charlotte worked alongside him, humming a tuneless melody, her enthusiasm infectious. Old Man Tiber, perched on his customary stool outside the blacksmith's, watched them with a knowing twinkle in his eye. He offered no advice, no commentary, just a quiet, approving nod when Samuel finally straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, a faint smile on his face. They planted lettuce, carrots, and a few rows of beans. Each tiny seed, carefully placed in the freshly tilled earth, felt like a gamble on the weather, on their own diligence, and on the fragile, hopeful tendrils of a future they were attempting to cultivate together. As the last seed was covered, Charlotte stood back, brushing dirt from her hands, a triumphant glow on her face. "There," she said, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "The first step." Samuel looked at the neat rows, the promise of life hidden beneath the dark soil. He still had no land, no money, and the future remained uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, the emptiness within him felt a little less vast, a little less cold. He had Charlotte, and together they had planted a garden. And in those tiny, vulnerable seeds, he felt a faint stirring of purpose, a nascent hope he hadn't known he still possessed. The rancher's threat. The clang of the old bell above the general store's door announced a presence, not a welcome one. Charlotte, her brow furrowed with the effort of nudging a ponderous molasses barrel into place, straightened slowly. Her hands, still sticky despite a quick wipe on her apron, clenched as she recognized the broad, imposing frame filling the doorway. Jedediah Stone. Even the air in the dusty store seemed to thicken with his arrival, carrying the faint, unpleasant scent of stale tobacco and unwashed wool. "Well, well, if it ain't the city woman playing shopkeeper," Stone drawled, his voice a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate the very floorboards. He swaggered further in, his boots scuffing the worn wood, a sneer twisting his thick lips. His eyes, small and cold, raked over the shelves, dismissing the meager stock. "Heard you bought this heap of kindling. A fool's errand, I'd say." Charlotte bristled, though she forced a pleasant, if strained, smile. "It's a fine store, Mr. Stone, and it's not for sale." Stone chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound. "Everything's for sale, little lady, if the price is right. And I've got a price for this ramshackle establishment." He pulled a small, worn leather pouch from his pocket and tossed it onto the counter with a clatter. It landed with a puff of dust, coins rattling inside. "That's $200, cash. Take it or leave it." Charlotte stared at the pouch, then at Stone, her jaw tightening. $200. It wouldn't even cover the lumber she'd ordered for repairs, let alone the initial purchase. "That's an insult, Mr. Stone. This store is worth far more. And as I said, it's not for sale." Stone's sneer deepened, his eyes narrowing to slits. "An insult, is it? Listen here, girl. This whole valley will be mine eventually. I own most of the grazing land, control the water rights. You think you can set up shop here and expect to thrive without my say-so? I can make things very difficult for you. Your supply wagons might get lost. Your customers might find more interesting things to do in town. Your dreams, as you call them, will turn to dust. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. I'm not asking, Miss Hayes. I'm telling you. Samuel, who had been lingering in the shadows of the alley across the street, felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. He'd seen Stone's type before, bullies who thrived on intimidation. His first instinct, honed by years of avoiding trouble, was to melt away, to disappear. What could a penniless drifter like him do against a man with Stone's power and reputation? He remembered his promise to Charlotte, that quiet vow to himself to be useful, to be more than just a ghost haunting the edges of her life. But the old fear, the gnawing doubt that he wasn't enough, that he would only make things worse, was a familiar, suffocating shroud. Inside the store, Charlotte's face had paled, but her chin remained defiantly high. You won't scare me off, Mr. Stone. I've worked too hard. Stone let out another dismissive laugh. Stubborn, are we? Fine. You'll learn. You'll learn the hard way that this town belongs to me. And when you're begging for scraps, that 200 will look mighty generous. He turned to leave, his heavy frame filling the doorway once more. That was it, the dismissal, the utter disregard for her effort, for her very presence. Something in Samuel snapped. He pushed off the alley wall, his boots scraping on the packed earth. The sound, though small, was sharp in the sudden quiet. Stone paused, turning his head slowly. Samuel walked deliberately across the street, each step a conscious effort against the tremor in his knees. The sun glinted off the dust motes dancing in the store's doorway, momentarily obscuring Stone's face. Samuel pushed past him, planting himself firmly between Stone and Charlotte, though his own heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. She said no, Stone. Samuel's voice, surprisingly steady, cut through the tension. It was gruff, a little rusty, but it held a new, unfamiliar conviction. He felt Charlotte's surprised gaze on his back. Stone's eyes, already narrowed, now glinted with something akin to disbelief, then contempt. Well, well, if it ain't the stray dog come to bark. You got business here, Drifter? His hand instinctively went to his hip, where a holstered pistol usually resided. Today, it was absent, a fact Samuel noted with a small surge of relief. My business is making sure she's left alone, Samuel replied, the words feeling foreign yet right on his tongue. He met Stone's icy stare, a challenge he never thought he'd issue. She's not selling, not to you, not ever. The Trading Post. The late afternoon sun, a fiery orb sinking behind the distant peaks, cast long shadows across the dusty floorboards of the general store. Charlotte, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, straightened from wrestling with a stubborn barrel of molasses. Her muscles ached, but a flicker of determination still burned in her eyes. Samuel, leaning against the doorframe, observed her quiet struggle. The sight of her unwavering resolve, even in the face of such simple, back-breaking labor, stirred something dormant within him. He cleared his throat. You know, he began, his voice a low rumble. This place, it could be more than just a store. Charlotte turned, her gaze direct. It has to be. The last proprietor, old Silas, well, he didn't exactly earn a reputation for honesty. People in these parts, they've been fleeced too many times. Samuel pushed off the doorframe, walking further into the cavernous space. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and dust, but beneath it, he could almost imagine the aroma of freshly baked bread, new leather, and dried herbs. Exactly, that's the opening. A fair trading post. A place where a man can bring his furs, his cured meat, his raw ore, and know he's getting a square deal. No more shorting on weight, no more haggling over pennies like a miser. Charlotte's eyes widened, a spark of excitement replacing the weariness. A trading post, not just a store, a hub, a place where trust is the currency. Precisely, Samuel affirmed, a rare smile touching his lips. We'd offer honest prices for honest goods. We'd connect the trappers from the mountains with the farmers downriver, the miners with the town. We'd be the bridge. The idea, once a fleeting thought, solidified, taking on a tangible shape in the dusty air between them. He felt a nascent thrill, a sense of purpose he hadn't known in years. His hands, accustomed to the worn leather of reins and the cold steel of a rifle, yearned for a new kind of work, a building, a creating. Over the next few weeks, the general store underwent a remarkable transformation. Samuel, whose hands had always been capable, found a new outlet for his strength. He repaired shelves, reinforced the counter, and helped Charlotte scrub away decades of grime. They hauled out disused barrels, sorted through rusty tools, and meticulously inventoried every last item. Charlotte, with her keen eye for detail and surprising organizational skills, became the architect of their new system. She drafted ledgers, planned out display spaces, and even convinced Samuel to paint a new sign, a simple, bold, "The Haven Trading Post," in stark black letters on a fresh plank of wood. Their days were a blur of activity, fueled by strong coffee and a shared vision. Samuel found himself anticipating the sunrise, eager to tackle the next task. He learned the nuances of assessing a pelt's quality, the subtle differences in grain needed for proper lumber, and the best way to haggle for a good price on cured ham from a passing drover without seeming predatory. Charlotte, meanwhile, cultivated relationships. She spent hours talking to the few souls who ventured near, patiently explaining their new philosophy, assuring them of their commitment to fairness. Old Man Tiber, a fixture on the settlement's single street, would often sit on a nearby bench, watching their tireless efforts with a knowing nod and a faint, approving smile. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, word began to spread. A trapper, initially skeptical, brought in a bundle of fox furs and left with more coin than he'd ever received from Silas. A farmer traded a wagon load of surplus potatoes for a new plowshare, the exchange fair and unburdened by hidden fees. The creak of the front door became more frequent. People, initially wary, started to venture inside, their eyes scanning the shelves, then lingering on Samuel and Charlotte, searching for signs of the old ways. What they found instead were open ledgers, clear prices, and a genuine warmth that was as rare as gold dust in these parts. The small community, starved for honest dealings, began to embrace the Haven Trading Post. Children, shy at first, would peer through the windows, drawn by the smell of fresh baked biscuits Charlotte sometimes offered. Men, hardened by the frontier, would linger after their transactions, sharing news or simply enjoying the quiet hum of commerce. The store, once a symbol of avarice, was slowly becoming a beacon of trust, a testament to the power of a shared purpose, and a new path forged by two unlikely partners. Samuel, watching a line of customers forming outside, felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling far more precious than any fleeting fortune. He was building something, not just for himself, but for her, and for this nascent community. And in that, he found a profound, unexpected peace. Finding worth. The scent of cured leather and pine pitch hung in the air, a familiar comfort now. Samuel leaned against the newly planed counter, watching a trapper haggle over the price of a deer hide. The man, weathered and wary, held his ground, but Samuel had learned the subtle art of the trade. He gestured to a bolt of sturdy canvas, its weave tight and resilient. "That hide," Samuel began, his voice steady, "is fine, but it's small. Now that canvas, think of the pack sacks you could make. Warm, dry, or perhaps a new tent flap, sturdy enough to face winter's bite." He spoke not of profit, but of utility, of a future comfort. The trapper's eyes narrowed, then widened as he considered the possibilities. A quiet nod sealed the deal, a fair exchange for both. A surge of something unfamiliar, yet deeply satisfying, warmed Samuel's chest. It wasn't the thrill of a successful hunt, nor the fleeting pleasure of a winning poker hand. This was different. This was building, contributing. He watched the trapper walk out, a satisfied grin on his face, and a matching one found its way to Samuel's own lips. It wasn't about being the fastest draw or the strongest rider anymore. It was about knowing the worth of a good hide, the resilience of canvas, and the needs of the people who passed through their doors. Later, as the last rays of sunlight bled through the dusty windows, Samuel paused to survey the bustling store. Shelves, once bare, now groaned under the weight of goods: sacks of flour, barrels of salted fish, bolts of calico, gleaming tools. Each item represented a successful negotiation, a problem solved, a need met. He thought back to the desolate, empty space it had been, a reflection of his own life's barren landscape. He remembered the gnawing emptiness, the fear that he was nothing more than a ghost drifting across the land. But that feeling had begun to recede, replaced by the solid ground beneath his feet. His worth, he realized, wasn't in the acres he didn't own or the coins that never stayed in his pocket. It wasn't in proving himself against another man's strength. It was in the quiet satisfaction of seeing Charlotte's eyes light up when a new shipment arrived, in the shared laughter over a customer's tale, and the tangible proof that they were creating something from nothing. His value was intertwined with their purpose, a purpose he'd found in her. She had seen past his worn boots and empty pockets, past the weary cynicism, and offered him a chance to be useful, to be needed. And in doing so, she had shown him he was capable of far more than merely surviving. The creak of the floorboards announced Charlotte's presence. She moved with a graceful efficiency, sweeping stray dust motes from the counter. Her hair, usually pinned up, had escaped its confines, framing her face in soft waves. She caught his eye, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Another good day, Samuel," she murmured, her voice a soothing balm after the day's clamor. He nodded, leaning against the counter, savoring the quiet intimacy of the moment. The air hummed with the day's residual energy, a pleasant echo of their collective effort. "The canvas sold well," he offered, his gaze lingering on her. "Old man Tiber was pleased with the new tobacco shipment, too." Charlotte chuckled softly. "He always is. But it's more than just the sales, isn't it?" She walked towards him, stopping just a breath away. Her hand, soft and warm, rested lightly on his arm. "It's seeing what we've built, Samuel. From nothing." Her eyes, deep and luminous, held a mixture of pride and affection. "You've brought so much to this, to us." He covered her hand with his, feeling the gentle pulse beneath his fingers. Her touch was a constant reassurance, a grounding force. "And you, Charlotte," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "You opened my eyes to it all. You showed me that there was something worth building for." He looked around the thriving store, then back at her, the most precious treasure within its walls. The shadows lengthened, painting the room in hues of orange and gold. In that quiet space, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, Samuel knew, with absolute certainty, that he had finally found his worth, not in a distant horizon, but right here, by her side. Years flowed seamlessly into one another, each turn of the calendar adding depth and vitality to the burgeoning settlement. The solitary, weather-beaten clapboard store, once a tenuous endeavor, now boasted an expansive lean-to, its shelves groaning under the weight of abundant provisions. The air, a dynamic blend of pine tar and cured leather, now also embraced the sweet notes of dried fruit and freshly baked bread, a constant, fragrant testament to thriving commerce. Wagons, no longer novelties, traversed the dusty main thoroughfare with predictable regularity, laden with furs, grains, and manufactured goods from distant metropolises. Children, their laughter a joyful cascade through the valley, chased chickens around the expanded corrals, a scene that would have been unimaginable in earlier days. Samuel, at 46, carried himself with newfound stature. The gauntness beneath his eyes had vanished, replaced by a steady gaze that radiated both warmth and keen intellect. His hands, once calloused from incessant wanderings, were now etched with the marks of purposeful labor. The meticulous joinery of new shelving, the precise accounting of ledgers, the firm swing of a hammer driving nails into sturdy planks. He had shed his threadbare attire for robust, well-kept garments that spoke of comfort and earned respect. The pervasive shadow of insecurity that had once dogged him had receded, yielding to an easy confidence forged from shared triumphs and unwavering fidelity. He watched Charlotte, her auburn hair now subtly threaded with silver that only enhanced her grace, deftly negotiating the price of beaver pelts with a burly trapper. Her voice, still clear and melodious, now possessed a distinct authority, a subtle firmness that commanded deference. She gestured with practiced ease, her mind a swift abacus calculating profit margins and anticipating supply demands. Her eyes, still the captivating blue that had first ensnared him, now sparkled with the vibrancy of achievement. A sudden, boisterous burst of laughter from the corner of the store drew Samuel's attention. Old man Tiber, his face a roadmap of satisfied wrinkles, exhaled a plume of fragrant smoke. "Finest Virginia leaf I've had in years, Samuel," he boomed, tapping his pipe against the counter. "You two truly understand how to run a proper establishment." Samuel offered a genuine smile, a world away from the forced pleasantries of his youth. "Glad to hear it, Tiber. We aim to please." As the last of the afternoon customers departed, the setting sun painted long golden streaks across the trading post. Samuel approached Charlotte, his arm encircling her waist. She leaned into his embrace, her head finding a natural resting place on his shoulder. They stood there, side by side, surveying the vibrant heart of their creation. The trading post transcended mere business. It was the living, breathing monument to their shared vision. It stood as a beacon of civilization in the wilderness, a place where people discovered not just goods, but community and connection. Every nail driven, every ledger meticulously balanced, every shipment received, every smile exchanged, was imbued with their dedication, their sacrifice, and their deep affection. "Remember that first barrel of molasses?" Charlotte mused, a soft chuckle escaping her lips. "I thought my back would give out right then." Samuel rumbled with laughter, the sound deep and resonant. "And I thought you'd send me packing when I offered to help." He tightened his arm around her. "Never imagined I'd find a place to belong, let alone build something like this." She turned within his embrace, her gaze meeting his, brimming with unspoken understanding and profound devotion. "We built it, Samuel, together, from nothing but hope and an abundance of hard work." Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, a gentle, possessive touch. "And love." He gazed into her eyes, seeing not just the woman he adored, but the unwavering partner who had believed in him when he himself had faltered. The gnawing fear of inadequacy, a specter that had shadowed his every step, was finally and truly vanquished. He was enough. He was more than enough. He was the man who stood beside Charlotte, the man who had helped forge a world from the ground up, a world now thriving and radiant, all because of the love they shared. He kissed her, a tender, lingering kiss that encapsulated their journey, their triumphs, and the enduring strength of their bond. The trading post, bathed in the soft glow of dusk, hummed with the quiet contentment of a life built on solid ground, built from love.